In this time countdown Unreal Engine 5 blueprint tutorial, we are going to create a timer that counts down in minutes and seconds. When the timer reaches under 10 seconds, it will turn red and play a sound effect, as well as when it reaches 0 seconds. For this tutorial, you can use your own project and implement this tutorial into it. And if you don't have a project just like me, you can go ahead and select a template. Now you can choose whatever template you wish here. I'm just going to select the first person template. I'm going to call it time countdown and then go ahead and create the project. When the project has been created, I'm going to go and click on the content drawer, and then I am clicking dock in layout, so this window stays up all the time. That will be a lot easier for you to follow. If you're interested in Unreal Engine 5 game development courses, you can visit my website pixelhelmet.com. Here I make both single player and multiplayer courses, with videos being released daily in 4K resolution. And I'm available 24/7 on my website or Discord server to help you out. All the links are in the description below. And before we start with anything, let's go ahead and create the UI. So let me just right click in the content folder, go ahead and click on new folder, and let's call it UI. And right click into this folder and then go to user interface and create a widget blueprint. So this is the UI inside of Unreal Engine. Select user widget and go ahead and call it WB. I'm just going to call it timer. You can call it whatever you want. Now open up this widget blueprint, and inside of here, before we start doing anything with the UI, you have to add the canvas first. So if you up here search for canvas, then you can click and drag this into the hierarchy, and then you can see you have now added this canvas into here. Okay, so when you have added the canvas, the timer is simply just some text. So if you just search for text, and you can click and drag it into here, or you can click and drag it down on the canvas. That is the same thing. Now I want my timer to be in the middle on the top here. So I'm going to click on anchors and select this top middle, and then set the position to 0, 0. Okay, you can see here it's not in the middle, it's snapping to this corner, and this is because I have to play around with the alignment. And in this case, it's the x-axis alignment, so it's this one. And you can set it to 0 0.5 if you want it in the middle. So it can either be 0, 0 0.5, or 1. And you can see when you write 1, it snaps to this side. So 0 0.5 because I want it to be in the middle, and make sure the position is 0, 0, and the anchor point is here where it should be. Okay, so before I do anything, I'm going to push the text down so it has some space up here in the screen. So if I click on it and in the position Y, I can just push it down slightly, maybe something like 30. So we have a bit of position up here. And you can also click on it and click on size to content, because then you don't have to worry about this size here. You can just click on size to content and it will stay to whatever size this text is. And also for the justification, click on the middle here. Okay, so make sure the position is at 0 for the X, so it stays in the middle. Now for the time here itself, for the text, it doesn't really matter. We are going to change it dynamically in the game. Now let's go ahead and add this UI to the game. So let's close this down and let us go to the first person and select the blueprint. And as I can see here, there's no player controller blueprint. Now you can go ahead and add the UI inside of the player. However, when you create widgets, it's nice practice to add it into the player controller. So don't add it anywhere else. Let's right click here. Let's just make a new one. Go to blueprint class and then select the player controller. I'm going to call it BP player controller. And now just make sure it is added to your game. So if you have a game mode here, if you haven't a game mode, go ahead and create that one as well. And if you have one, open up the game mode and make sure that the player controller class has been changed to the player controller you just made. So make sure that you have done that. And to check this as well, you can go to the world settings. And if you don't have the world settings tab, you can click on window and world settings. So inside of the world settings here in the game mode it is using right now, so you can see this is the game mode it's using. And you can click on the selected game mode and make sure that the player controller class is BP player controller that we just created. All right, so now it is applied to the game. Let's open up the player controller and let's go to the event graph. and here in the begin play. So simply the begin play event is an event that tells you what should happen when I begin playing the game. So this would happen instantly. And inside of here, the only thing we want to do is drag from this execution pin and say create widgets. So this is how you create UI inside of Unreal Engine. So you create a widget and then you select the widget you just made, WB timer, and then you right click and promote this to a variable. I'm going to call it WB timer. Just having it as a variable is really nice because we can use it later on. And now you can see when you click on play, nothing is happening. And this is because it is not enough to create the widget. You also have to add to viewport. So you have to add it to the viewport before it can be displayed. Now, if I click on play, you can see it is now displayed inside of my viewport. So now it is working correctly. Let us now start doing the timer. And the timer you can do inside of the player controller, or you can do it inside of the character. However, if we need to stay with a good coding practice, it is better to create it in the game mode. Because if you remember, the game mode controls the rules of the game. And you can see that if you right click, click on Blueprint Controller, you can see that the game mode defines the game being played, its rules, scoring, and so on. So it's better to use the game mode to create our timer. Let us now open up our game mode. And inside of here, let's make a new custom event. Let's right click and say custom event. And for this custom event, let's call it start countdown timer. And inside of here, let's drag and say timer by event. Now, this function here is very essential for this tutorial. With this function, we can loop a part of the code. So I can create a new event here, and it will loop some part of the code that we want to be looped. And I am going to loop it every second, so it keeps counting down the time. So timer by event. For this event here, we can click and drag, and we have to make a new custom event. And I'm just going to call it countdown timer. You can call it whatever you want. And for the time, I'm going to loop it every single second. And remember to call it looping. So you can see here, if I just drag from here and say print string, and it's going to say hello every second. Now, here I have to call this event, else the game doesn't know when to play this. So I have to go here, right click and say begin play. So in this begin play event, I'm going to drag and say start countdown timer, just like whatever you called it here for this event. Go ahead and call it in the begin play. And now you can see when I play, it's actually going to say hello every single second up here. You can see it's saying hello. Okay, so the code is working. Let's now delete this and write our logic. So let's create two variables. Let's create the first one, and I'm going to call it timer seconds. And I'm going to create the next one called timer minutes. And for the timer seconds, let's change it into an integer as well as the timer's minutes. So these are just numeric values. Let's take the timer seconds. And by the way, for the default, for the minutes, you can, for example, write 2 minutes. So your timer starts at 2 minutes by default, and the seconds is just 0. Okay, so let's take this timer and let's drag from here and say -1. So let's subtract 1 from it. And then let's go ahead and set the timer or timer seconds. Now we set it to a new value. So if it was, for example, 59, 59 minus 1 is 58, and it will set that new value into here. And then we have to take this timer seconds and ask, is this lower than 0? Because if it is lower than 0, for example, -1, then we actually have to subtract from the minutes and set this to 59 seconds again. And then we have to take the minutes as well. And we have to ask, is the minutes equal to 0? Because if this is lower than 0, let's say -1, and this one is 0, this means the timer should be stopped because we have reached 0. So for now, let's just drag from here and say print string. And let's say timer ended. So the timer has ended if the seconds is 0 and lower than 0, and the time is 0 as well, the timer minutes, then the timer has ended. However, if the timer minutes is still not 0, we can now take the minutes. We can say -1, so we can subtract 1 from the minutes and then set the minutes again, just like this. And then we can take the timer seconds and set it to 59. So now it's going to count down from 59 again, but we have subtracted 1 from the minutes. All right, so now it should be working actually. That is the logic for the timer. And you can see it right now. I can play and you can see nothing is happening here on the screen. And this is because we have not yet told the software to update the text UI. So to do this, remember, if I open up my UI, this is inside of this WB timer. And WB timer, we already created the player controller and we already created the variable here. So now we need blueprint communication because I need to communicate from my game mode to the player controller because I need this variable so I can call this event here that we will be creating inside of here. So let's do that. Let's go to the game mode. And down here, you can say get player controller. And now you have to tell Unreal Engine which player controller are you talking about. And we are talking about specifically BP player controller. So let's say cast 2. This is how you communicate with other blueprints. So let's say cast 2 and the name of the blueprint, BP player controller. So now we have it here. And let us connect it somewhere here. So let us actually connect it behind all of this. I'm just going to drag it away and hold Alt and click here to disconnect it. And I'm going to place it inside of here. So now we have the player controller. And when I have this reference, I can now access everything inside of here, including this variable. So if I just drag from here and write the variable name, WB timer, and now I can write the event that we will be creating inside of here. So let's create the event inside of here. Let me just delete all of this in WB timer. Right click inside of here and make a new custom event. And let's call this one update timer UI. Okay, in the update timer UI, we are going to need the 2 integers we are going to plug in a minute here. So we need the minutes left, and we also need the seconds left. So we need these 2 that we will be plugging in. Now, before we do all of this, let's go ahead and call the event so you can see it here. So let's drag from here, and we called it update timer UI. So drag from here and say update timer UI, and you can see it here, and go ahead and plug it in. Now let's plug everything in as well. And for the minutes left, let's take this minutes variable and plug it in. And for the seconds left, let's take this seconds variable and plug it in as well. And that should be working. So let's compile and save everything. And now let us do the logic inside of the UI so we can update the UI. The main thing we want for the UI is update this text. And you can see here, I don't have it as a variable somehow. And this is because you have to click on the text and you have to click on is variable. If you click on is variable, and let me just change the name of it so it's clear. I'm going to call it txt timer. And let's compile. And if I go to the graph, remember to tick is variable. If I go to the graph, you can now see I can see it as a variable. Now I can drag it into here and say set text. Now the set text is the main function that we will be using because we want to change the text. Now some people will say that you can just click here and bind the text and update it automatically. However, this is really not optimized. It will run many times a second, and this is not recommended. So it's better to go in the graph and set the text. That is a lot more optimized than binding text. And also I've seen some YouTube tutorials about this timer as well. They use event tick to do this code. This is really bad because event tick runs 60 times a second. This runs 1 time a second. This is a lot more efficient than using an event tick. Never use this in your game. So if you have seen a lot of YouTube tutorials talking about the event tick, please do not follow this suggestion. It's better to run it just 1 time a second and it will be a lot more efficient. Okay, go ahead and compile, go back to the timer. And inside of here, now we need to plug in the minutes left and minutes or seconds left. So let's drag from this. You can see right now, I can just click and drag and drop here, and I can only connect 1 pin node. But if you drag from here and say format text, and when you do a format text, you can extend it a bit. So I will just write it here and you can see what happens. So you have to make these curly brackets. So a curly bracket, and I'll say minutes left. You can make a space if you want to, and curly bracket close. You can see if I hit enter, I actually get a new pin node here that I can plug in. Now for this minutes left, I'm going to make a semicolon and open up a new curly bracket and say seconds left. And I'm going to close this curly bracket. And now I have two pins I can plug them into. So this one and this one as well. And I can go ahead and compile. Now let's go back to the game mode. And in the begin play, we remember to start the countdown timer, else it will never start. So this is done. Let's actually just play and see what happens. So you can see uh, we have the timer and it is counting down and everything is working. Now the problem is you can see here whenever I click on play, it says text block before it actually changes to the time. Now the best way you can do this to update this initially is because this timer is updating the UI after 1 second. It's actually not updating instantly. So whatever time you put here, let's say you, for example, put 3 seconds for the timer. So it's going to update the UI every 3 seconds. So if you click on play, you can see there goes 3 seconds before it actually does an update. So if I just put this back to 1, the best way to do this, to update this initially, let's go back to the player controller. And now here we created the UI. Before we display it to the viewport, we actually have to update it so it doesn't say text block. So we have to drag from this one and say update timer UI and go ahead and connect it. Now we need the variables for the minutes left and seconds left. And remember what I said before, you can communicate with blueprints doing this here. So let's do it together. Let's drag from this here and let's say get game mode. And this is because we're trying to get the reference for the game mode so we can access the timer seconds and timer minutes. So drag from here and say cast to game mode. And the game mode is called actually BP first person game mode. So it's this one, BP first person game mode. And go ahead and connect it up here. Okay, so now when it is connected, now you can drag from here and say minutes and get this timer minutes variable that we created earlier. And we can also drag from here and say seconds and get the timer seconds as well. And you can go ahead and connect it. Now, for this one, I'm just going to double click on it and make reroute nodes. So it is a lot better to look at, as well as this one. So double click up here, go ahead and click on Alt and click here to disconnect it and connect this one. Okay, let's compile. Now let's click on play and see what happens. So now when I click on play, you can see it doesn't say text block. It instantly starts with the time. Now, also one problem that we have right now, you can see when I click on play, there goes 1 second before it actually begins counting down. And remember what I said before, for timer by events, there goes like this time that you have written here. So if you write 3 again, there goes 3 seconds before it starts updating. So what you need to do is you need to update it once initially before you start all of this code here. So the way we can do this very, very easily, we can right click and make a new custom event. And let's call this one initial timer subtraction. And let's go ahead and connect this code here. So it counts down here for the seconds and minutes. So this one is just going to run once and we can call it here before the timer even starts. So let's drag from here and say initial timer subtraction. And you can go ahead and connect it here. So this one is going to run one time before the event starts. So we have to do this here. And let's go ahead and compile. Let's click on play and see what happens. And you can see here it starts with 1:59. And this is because we have to delay it here. So if I just write delay 0.01, and if I click on play now you can see it starts from 2. And the reason why I did this is because right now, if we don't have a delay and we just start like this, sometimes when I click on play for the game, it will actually give you an error. It gave me an error when I just played the game, and it says that this WB timer, it says access none, and this means this timer variable is empty. And this is because the game mode tries to run this variable before it has got a chance to even get created. So we have to delay by very, very small number here, 0.01, to give the player controller a chance to actually create this variable before we do anything. So before we start the timer. So let's compile, save everything. And if I click on play now, you can see the timer is counting down correctly and everything is updating. Now, for my liking, I like to, you can see here, if I stop this and I go to the seconds and I put the seconds to 10, and now if I click on play, you can see it only gives you one number. So 0, like 8765, I like to have it saying 04, 03, 02, and so on. So we have to do that as well. So follow along if you wish. Let's go over to the UI and let's open up the widget blueprint again. Inside of here, let's open up the graph. So in order to modify the seconds to give it as 0 in the beginning, we can disconnect it here. And instead of using an integer, we can use a string. So a string is just simply some text. We can drag from here, and I'm actually going to use the select node. So select, if you go down here, select, use this one. And now I'm going to ask if the seconds left is lower, so less than 10. Because if it is higher than 10, I don't want to put a 0 in front of it. That will look weird if it says 010 or 011, for example. So whenever the seconds left is under 10, I actually want to put the 0 in front of it. I'm going to right click this pin here. Actually, I'm going to disconnect it. It seems like it's bugging out. I'm going to right click, change pin type, and select the string as the pin type. Go ahead and compile and connect it just like this. So whenever it is under 10, if that is false, it means it is over 10. We are just going to plug in the amount of seconds left like this. And whenever it is actually lower than 10, so that will be true, we are going to drag from here and say append. Append just means add on top of my text. So I'm going to drag this seconds left into the B. And for the A, I'm going to write 0. So it's going to append these two. It's going to put them together. So it's going to say 0 and then 9, for example, if the seconds left is 9. I'm going to go ahead and organize this a bit more. All right, so everything has been organized. And as you can see, if I compile and I go back to the game mode and I put the timer seconds to something like 12 and I compile, if I click on play now, you can see the timer goes from 11 and then it says 09. So it doesn't just say 9. So this looks a lot better. And let's see if it actually counts down correctly. So it's if it says 02, 01, 00, and then it goes to 59. So everything is correct now. Now let's give the timer a color whenever it reaches under 10 seconds. So to do this, let us drag from the seconds left and ask if this is under or less than 10. And also making sure that the minutes is equal to 0, because we don't want it if the minutes is still not 0. For example, if you have 1 minute left still. So if the seconds is under 10 and the minutes is 0, we have to drag from here and say and use this one and boolean. So if the minutes left is 0 and the seconds left is under 10, we want to drag from here and write a branch. Okay, and connect it here. Go ahead and double click here to make a reroute node. So if it is the case that the minutes left is 0, seconds left is under 10, if that is true, we want to take this text timer and we want to say set color and choose this one called set color and opacity. Go ahead and connect it. And for this one, let's drag from here and select make slate color. And from this color, now you can select what color you want it to be. What I usually do is go into the designer, click on the text, click on the color and opacity, and just choose one from here that I want to use. For example, this color here. Then I can copy the hex linear color. And then I can just click on cancel for this one. I can go back to the graph. And for this specified color, click on it. And I'm going to paste in the hex linear color I used or I copied and click on OK. So now it's going to change to this color. Now, if you also want it to play a sound effect whenever it is under 10 seconds, so every second under 10 seconds, it's going to play a sound effect. You can drag from here and say play sound 2D and use this one play sound 2D. Now for the sound assets, I don't have any right now. If you have some, just go ahead and copy them in. I'm just going to make a new folder here, and call it audio. And I have some random text here or some random sound effects. These two here, I'm just going to click and drag them into my content browser. And here they are. And I'm going to click on both of them, right click and create multiple cues. So we have to create sound cues. And when you have these sound cues, before I play the sound, they are really loud. So I'm going to put it down to 0.2 for this one. And you can hear it here. Okay, awesome. And now for the other one as well, I am going to double click it to open it up. I'm going to put it down to 0.4. And if I click on play, this is the sound effect. Okay, let's go back to the timer. And I'm going to click here and select the sound cue. If I just search for timer, and it is the timer tick. So now it's going to play a sound effect. And let's try it out. Let's go to the game mode. Let's take the timers minutes. Let's put it down to 0. And let's take the timer seconds, put it to 12. Go ahead and play the game and see what it does. So under 10 seconds, it will turn red and play a sound effect. Okay, awesome. So when the timer ends, we have to do something. So here in the timer ended, we need to stop this timer, else the seconds will go under 0. So it will say -1, -2, and so on. So to do this, let's first right click here and promote this to a variable and call this countdown timer handle. And let's now take this variable over here to the end, and let's take it out and say clear and invalidate timer. That is how you stop a timer from playing anymore. So whenever the timer ends, we want to clear and invalidate the timer. And we also want to play sound effect 2D. So play sound 2D. And we want to play the one I just imported, timer ended. So now let us go ahead and test it out. So if I close this and I click on play, now you can see I'm playing the game. And when it reaches under 10, it's going to count down. You can see here I can play. And whenever it reaches 0, it should play that sound effect as well.